access the internet except as it relates to the official business of the meeting, send or receive emails, text messages or tweets concerning the business of the committee to anyone outside the meeting. Please note that members may be accessing the agenda papers via the internet. We will be taking a 5-minute screen break every hour and reconvening afterwards. I now will turn to officers to introduce themselves and explain their roles at this meeting. You've already heard that Simon Bevan is here. Simon, if you just like to sort of formally introduce yourself, I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Simon Bevan. I'm Director of Planning, here to generally advise the committee on planning matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Michael Sakaris, are you here this evening? Are you still here?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm Michael Sakaris. I'm Group Manager Design and Conservation, and I'm here to assist on the application related to Grange Walk.
Thank you, Michael. Dipesh Patel, if you'd like to formally introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the planning officer presenting the application and here to answer any questions members may have.
Thank you. Now, is Kerry Simpson at all with us this evening? No.
No, Chair,
John,
she's not here. So I was just interrupting, sorry.
No, not at all, Beverly, thank you. John Gorse?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. My name is John Gorst. I'm a solicitor with Southwark Council, and I'll be advising members on legal and governance matters this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Beverly?
Yes, my name is Beverly Olamajulo, and I am the Constitutional Officer, and I will be clerking the subcommittee and taking the minutes for this meeting.
Thank you, Beverly. Is Tim joining you this evening at all?
No, it's actually Poonam Patel. She's just doing the IT support, although Tim's there, but he's in something else that he's doing.
Oh, IT. So I turn to you. You're the main person. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We've got apologies from one member of our committee this evening, and that's Councillor Carl Eastham, and there are no further apologies received. Thank you. I'd just like to therefore proceed with confirmation of voting members. So in no particular order, Councillor Marie Limphoff Hall.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Maria Limphoff Hall, Vice Chair of the committee and voting member of the committee.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria. Councillor Sirajul Islam.
Yes, my name is Councillor Islam. I'm a member of this subcommittee.
Thank you, Sirajul. Councillor Victoria Mills.
Good evening, Chair. It's Councillor Victoria Mills, and I'm a voting member of the committee.
Thank you, Victoria. Councillor David Noakes.
Good evening, Chair. I'm a voting member of the committee and a ward councillor for Barham Bankside Ward.
Thank you, David. Councillor Martin Seaton.
Yeah, Councillor Martin Seaton. I'm also a member of the committee and a voting member.
Thank you, Martin. And I too, Councillor Cleo Soanes, a voting member of this committee. Are there any items of business seeing urgent? No, we've got a supplemental agenda pack, members pack, which has been circulated. Members, are you all in receipt of that? Just thumbs up if you are. And that there's an addendum report that has been circulated. Yeah, okay, thank you. Does any member wish to declare any interest of dispensation in respect of any item or issue to be considered at this evening's meeting? No, just checking. Okay, and thank you. So moving on to the meeting of the 3rd of March, can we approve the minutes as a correct record of the meeting held on the 3rd of March? Can I propose that we accept them as written? Anyone wish to second that, please?
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. Are we all in favour?
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much. That's really helpful. Moving on, the next item of business concerns a determination of planning applications. I would like to remind everyone of the subcommittee guidance on the conduct of business. So just to save a bit of time, we've got officers, objectors, applicants, supporters, ward member if present, supporters if who live within 100 metres, all have an opportunity to present this evening up to 3 minutes. Okay, and hopefully objectors and applicants present would have had an opportunity to, if there's more than one of you, decide who's going to speak, and if there's more than one of you, then to split the time up to 3 minutes. And I will ask the constitutional officer to sort of keep time and give you a 30-second warning. After receiving all submissions, the subcommittee will debate the application and consider the recommendation. This is a council subcommittee meeting which is open to the public, and there should be no interruptions from members of the public. Finally, I would like everyone present to know that although the planning subcommittee comprises members from different political parties, we are not politically whipped. Our decisions are made in accordance with the council's planning policy and based on the information, I beg your pardon, contained within the relevant reports, together with the consultation responses and any verbal submissions made today. How we approach these applications is set out in the development management report at item 7, and if members are happy to note that report, we will move on to consider the applications. Councillor Noakes, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I just remembered that and I think other members may have also received this. I did receive a sort of briefing from the applicant that was emailed out to members of the committee. Just for the record, I just wanted to put that on the record that I received that.
Righto, thank you. Are officers satisfied with that? John, are you satisfied that we've?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I mean, it is unusual for the applicant to send round everything to members, because of course that's kept that's detailed in the report and the addendum. But in this case, the applicant did make that submission, so I think councillors will all have received it. So thank you for mentioning it, Councillor Noakes, and that's absolutely fine.
Thank you, David. Councillor Mills, you've got your hand.
I mean, it's the same. So just to confirm, I received it too. If we're noting that we've received it.
Yeah, that's fine, Councillor. I think we can accept that you've all received it. but as I say, what you should really be concentrating on is the report that's coming from officers and also the addendum. But thank you for mentioning it, and we'll assume you're all in the same proverbial boat. Thank you.
Thank you for that, John, and thank you, members. So we'll move on to the application before us this evening. 7.1, 46 to 48 Grange Walk, London SE1 3DY. It refers to pages 10 to 55 of the agenda pack and addendum report, as we've already mentioned. So can I now invite Dipesh Patel, Planning Officer, to present the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You should be able to see my screen soon. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
can. Thank you. Thank you, Dipesh.
So this is an application for construction of a Part 2, Part 3 story roof extension on a site, which I'll come on to. Just draw members' attention to the addendum report. It contains slides from objectors and also summary the applicant's response and some comments from officers. I'll come on to those a little bit later. And it also confirms that the highway works in paragraph 96 of the main report should be included within the legal agreement if a resolution to grant is given today. So the site, this is the site here. It's at the corner of Grange Walk and the Grange. Grange is the street going north to south on the right of the site. It is in a mixed area. The area shaded red to the left, to the west, is the Bermondsey Street Conservation Area. And as you can see, that it is between 30 and 50 odd meters from the conservation area. And that there are intervening buildings. So just take you to this aerial photograph, which shows you the site. So the site is here. It contains the building here, which is 48, and this is where there's no building, is 46 to 47. That's now been built. So that's the site. It's in a mixed area, as I mentioned. The Corio development, which was completed in 2017, is here on the left of the screen. It's of varying heights from 7 and dropping down to the sides. The buildings either side are mainly 4 stories in the immediate context. And there's the St Saviour's Estate, which is up to 7 stories. The conservation area itself goes to the end of this terrace in the center of the screen, these terrace houses with the butterfly roofs, and runs along the middle of the road. So we've had quite a number of comments on this application, as you can see on the screen. 27 comments in support, 6 neutral, and 52 objections. So on the objections themselves, there are a number of objections, and they're summarised here. So the potential phased development to avoid affordable housing contribution, design and heritage impacts, and impacts on neighbouring amenity, and also impacts from transport. So I'll go through those in the presentation. Before I move on to that, actually, I should mention that the proposal has been reduced. It was originally for 6 dwellings, and the scale has been reduced to the west on the side of the conservation area to reduce the massing. There's some diagrams following the presentation to show that. So it's now for 5 dwellings. This is the existing northern elevation, looking south. So the building at 46 to 47, which wasn't shown, wasn't on the aerial photograph, is there. Corio House development is on the left, and an 80s flatter development just on the right. This is the proposed northern elevation, and the massing you can see that was reduced is on this corner in the center of the screen. So that massing was reduced, resulting in 1 less dwelling being proposed. As you can see, the height is comparable to the Corio, but in fact it's actually higher, around 10 centimeters higher at its highest point, but there is a setback on the top floor. And there are some additional views. So for phased development, in 2016, there was pre-application advice sought to say that 5 stories was on 46 to 47 would be acceptable. That was partly because Corio hadn't been completed, so officers took a precautionary approach in that case. Corio was then completed, which meant the townscape changed. An important, in 2017, the 9 dwellings that was part of the 2016 pre-app were approved. And then there was an appeal decision for a site on the Old Kent Road. This was a scheme of 9 dwellings that was approved. Soon after it was built out, the applicant came in for 2 additional dwellings, and it was refused because it wouldn't provide affordable housing. That went to an appeal, and the inspector allowed the appeal, saying that in this case the extension wasn't phased development. So that had an effect on how we were looking at phased development and schemes. Prior to that, we would have asked for a contribution following it, but after that decision, any schemes with 9, 10 dwellings we are now asking developers to agree to, in the legal agreement, for any additional development that takes place to then provide a contribution to affordable housing. So, and then in 2018, there was pre-application advice on this scheme saying that 3 stories was acceptable because of that change in townscape. So that's just to provide you with just a summary of why we don't think that it can be justified for this scheme to be considered phased development to avoid affordable housing contribution. More detail is provided in the report, and that advice is based on some quite detailed work from Collins Legal. So in terms of design and heritage, again, I'll pull this slide up, which shows the site in the context of the Bermondsey Street Conservation Area to the west. This slide here shows the view from the conservation area with the terrace immediately on the right. As you can see, the townscape is varied. There are developments of differing heights within the context of the site, and the site is just here, that darker color brick. The proposed scheme, again, the articulation here on the roof in the center of the screen shows the reduced massing to reduce the impact on the conservation area. As you can see, the terraces, those buildings with the chimneys, the proposed development would not be seen above those roofs, which is why we as officers think that the impact on the conservation area, well, it wouldn't affect the setting of the conservation area. There are some views, again, this is a view looking west with the Corio on the left, just showing the proposed development in its townscape. And this is the view looking south. So in terms of townscape, it would be larger than its immediate neighbours, but it is in that wider context of buildings of greater mass and greater height. So we think the townscape impact is acceptable. On to impact on neighbours. I'll talk a bit more about daylight and sunlight in a moment. In terms of the sense of enclosure, there's good separation from the site to the neighbours by roads, and it's no closer than the existing building. The impact on privacy and overlooking, the distance separations in our residential design standards are met for this scheme. And another matter raised by objectors was construction. So that impact is temporary, and it's well controlled by other legislation, the Control of Pollution Act and the Environmental Protection Act. So it's not a significant consideration for you this evening. On to the impacts on neighbours. So from daylight and sunlight, the impacts are detailed in the report. Other than for the Corio building, most windows affected are either non-residential or secondary windows. There are a number of windows that would lose a significant amount of daylight within Corio, and these slides show them here. So the ones that would be over 40%, they're highlighted. So 74 here, there's 129 there, and 155 and 142. This is tabulated in the report. But as you can see from these images, the windows of concern, or the windows that would be affected most significantly, do have a level of restriction because of the overhangs that affect them. They also have very low VSEs to start with, so between 9 and 0.2, which means that a relatively small absolute loss in VSE results in a large relative reduction. And members will remember the BRE guidance says that an impact of a reduction of more than 20% is an adverse impact. An alternative VSE assessment has been carried out without balconies, and this is on paragraph 76 of the committee report, and that shows that only 6 windows would have a reduction of more than 20%, And of those 6 windows, I think the greatest reduction would be around 24%. There are similar impacts in terms of sunlight, and the details are presented in paragraph 81 of the report. 4 windows would have a significant reduction, but again, part of that reason is because of these overhangs. And the assessment, the alternative assessment without the overhangs, shows that they would be compliant with the BRE guidance. Onto transport impact. The site is within a controlled parking zone, so conditions being recommended prohibiting future residents from obtaining parking permits. The servicing would be as existing. There's improved refuse and cycle store on the ground floor, and the cycle parking meets the requirements of the London plan. This is the ground floor, and as you can see here, this is the refuse area shown with the bike parking just at the bottom of the screen there. And in terms of the quality of accommodation, all of the proposed dwellings would be dual aspect. They would meet the requirement for outdoor amenity space, the individual requirement for outdoor amenity space. There is a shortfall on communal amenity space, and it's recommended that that be made up through a payment in lieu. I think I'll leave it there, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dipesh. Do members have any questions for Dipesh on anything they've seen in the presentation? Do you need to seek clarification on anything? I've got a hand from Councillor Seaton. Go ahead, Councillor Seaton.
And thank you, Chair. And if I may ask, if I could just explore further with Dipesh, the issue of phased development. I just want to just bottom that one out once and for all if we can. And notwithstanding your comment in the report and your reference in your presentation to the Old Kent Road example, and that's accepted. But of course, the general rule here is that all applications are considered on their individual merits, and I believe that remains the case. All righty. So just to understand, these 2 buildings have been in the same owner throughout this time, and the reason why you do not consider it to be phased development, your opinion that it's not phased development, is because there's a planning regulation that suggests that these are 2 separate units, even though they are units which are adjacent to each other, they have the same owner, and indeed the same owner is seeking to build a common facade across both buildings, and indeed on top add additional floors. This is still considered, at this juncture at least, to be separate units. My question is, at what point would you consider them to be a single unit, bearing in mind the common facade and the extension, the common extension that's been proposed on the roof? Just want to get that first of all, and then I can double back with my real questions.
Sure, thank you, Councillor Seaton. So the reason I provided the example at the Old Kent Road, because there are similarities here and there. So the site on the Old Kent Road, it was one development. They were putting the roof extension on top. The same entrance, same services would be used, same common areas, and that has similarities with this site. But the inspector held there that at the time the original development was completed, the developer did not have it in their mind to put additional dwellings on. So it was I think in that case was changing, the developer said it changing the market circumstances, which sought them to change it. So our advice to you here is that there is a similarity in the sense that when 46 to 47 was developed, our advice to the developer was 5 stories is all you can do because, as I mentioned, because of Corio hadn't been developed. So they couldn't have had it in their mind to do any more. Subsequent to that, Corio was completed, the townscape changed, and there was an opportunity for the developer to put additional stories. And using that same logic for the Old Kent Road, we couldn't then make an argument to say that's its phased development to avoid affordable housing. Does that answer your question?
No, it doesn't. Mark, my question is, at what point would you consider this to be a single unit for legal purposes? As it's the same owner, it's always been in the same owner. They're developing a common facade and also putting an extension on the roof. Would you now consider this, once it's completed, to be a single planning unit, the term you're using?
Forgive me, Councillor Seaton. Sorry, John.
Yeah, if I could come in there, Councillor Seaton. I mean, first of all, you're absolutely right. The Old Kent Road, whilst it is a factor, whilst it is a material consideration, we're looking at a different site here, so we have to look at it independently. I think officers are really aware that this is a key issue for councillors. Southwark is very proud of its affordable housing delivery and is very keen to maximise that. So officers are always questioning developers as to whether or not they can be providing the maximum amount of affordable housing, and also particularly when we're looking at the threshold of 10 units as this one's on. I mean, in answer to your question, I don't think we'd be specific, Councillor Seaton. There's no sort of magic 5-year period or whatever that you suddenly get over the line with. But on this one, we're talking about quite a lapse of time between the first building being acquired and then the second building being acquired, and we're now, in fact, 13 years after the first building was acquired. So there is quite a lapse of time. And when we look at the two separate buildings, that's 48 and 46 and 47, they have been separate buildings for some time. And whilst they were eventually in single ownership, that wasn't the case for some time. And there is case law, a case called Brandlord that we looked at, which confirmed that even if there was single ownership, then that's not necessarily definitive in determining whether or not they are phased units. So we had the problem about the timescale. We also took the view that they were separate planning units. And then there's the issue of the pre-application advice in 2017, 2018 that Dipesh mentioned earlier, when they were looking at that stage to put an extra floor on, and the pre-application advice was that it wouldn't be allowed at that time. So that's a third limb, if you like, to the first 2 limbs. So we would very much like to push developers to say, yes, it is, they should be contributing to affordable housing, and certainly looked at that very, very closely in this case, but felt for those limbs, and there are a number of separate limbs, that it failed.
Chair, you're kind of preempting my follow-up question. My question is, once this is completed, would you consider this to be a single development unit for planning purposes? That's my question, first of all.
Yes, I've skirted around that, Councillor Seaton, and that's a very straight question. And I think, yeah, absolutely, yes, it would be at that stage a single planning unit. I think.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of time. Yeah. If I may, Chair, just ask a follow-up question now that I've got the definitive answer to that question. Mm-hmm. With that in mind, and both yourself, John, and Dipesh have indicated that the developer, if he had the opportunity, would have built higher, and we've been asked to concur with you that the developer didn't have it in mind in terms of phased development as it's legally defined. But you both confirm that if the applicant had the opportunity to build higher at an earlier stage, the applicant would have built higher. Therefore, there's a strong implication, therefore, that there is phased development intent, but it's only moderated by yourself. But we're asked to accept the initial argument that that was not in the mind of the applicant, but yet you go on to say, but we told the applicant you could not go higher, even though I assume that they wanted to go higher. So that implies phased development, or the potential for phased development. So, and I think that's a correct interpretation of what you both have said. Am I correct?
Yes, you're looking at it from the point of view of where he was in 2017.
Yes.
I think you can still argue that at that stage that they were separate planning units, because at that stage there was they were separate buildings that had been developed separately. So I think from that point of view, whilst perhaps at 2017 he was looking at a longer term and the possibility, at that stage we still would have the separate planning building argument that we'd have to overcome. So you're right to some extent, but I still don't think that you get over that separate argument.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask further question, but of course it's a question of interpretation, and the committee members have been asked to make that final determination. So I want to ask further questions. I may return to this point later on. I'm keen to listen to the applicant when they make their submission. Thank you, John.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I think it's going to be really important that you do ask your questions, but I am similarly conscious of time, so as long as it's sort of you're succinct and members too are succinct with their questions. David, you've had your and thank you for your patience, you've had your hand up. Proceed if you'd like to ask Dipesh or legal officer question, or any officer present a question.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to see if officers wanted to say any more in relation to the proposed height of 46 to 48, going up to 8 stories. Obviously, I appreciate sort of to some extent the context in regards to the height of Corio House and St Vincent House, but obviously it's significantly taller than the buildings next door on 1 to 12, and then obviously along the sort of immediate length of Grange Walk. And I just wondered if you could say any more about why you would consider that not to be an overdevelopment of the site, and why that sort of quite dramatic increase in height, arguably, is sort of considered to be acceptable from a planning policy point of view.
So perhaps could I sort of initially invite Dipesh, and then perhaps Michael, if you've got any additional comments, that might be helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that, David.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Noakes. I think I'll just go back to the points I made in the presentation. So the views that were provided with the site is read in the context of some large scale developments nearby, as you mentioned, on St Saviour's Estate and Corio House. And there have been reductions in the scale, or the massing rather, to the west, nearer the Bermondsey Street conservation area. But I might pass over to Michael, who will be able to explain much better than I can.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Noakes. Yes, indeed, Dipesh mentioned that the sort of established context, and particularly with Corio House, but also with St Vincent's Square, the estate across the road. So that establishes, when we look at height, we always consider the prevailing height, what we call the prevailing height, the height of the buildings nearby. And if you take that as a guide, you can see that in Grange Walk and in that area, there are a few, the heights are around about 6-7 stories high. The proposal does go to 8 stories. Yes, it is set back on both on the front, and steps deliberately up to that height, and as a consequence is 100 mil, or roughly about 100 mil taller than the Corio House scheme. But we saw that as really very much of a similar order and bulk as the prevailing context. I think finally, I think the one thing that we also take into account is the fact that it is on a corner, and being on a corner often makes it like a node or a place. You often, in urban design terms, you often rise up to the corner. I'm sure you've seen that in typically in Victorian times and things like that, pubs with taller elements on the corner. It's almost a sort of a bookend or a full stop at the end of an established townscape. So it is a matter of judgment, but those were the things we took into account: the prevailing height and the corner location as being and the established townscape of quite large developments, the new and the existing. The estate, as well as the recently completed Corio House, before we made our concluded on this proposal in terms of its urban design and its height and massing.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Michael. Any follow-ups to that, David?
I think I'll wait to hear. Yeah.
Righto. Okay. Maria, you did have your hand up. But I can no longer see it. Do you still wish to ask a question?
Yes, it keeps staying there for a second and then going, Chair. Thank you very much.
Right. No, yes, do ask.
You. Yes, I do have a question similar to Councillor Noakes to Officer Michael Tsokaris. Can you please tell me if the Corio House was the first one of its height of 8 floors, and then followed by the proposed development? Is that correct? Or are there many more on the area that they are of similar height?
Thank you, Chair. The Corio House is the first building, the first or most recently completed development that is of that height. The estate. The estate across the road is also of a similar height, is 7 stories high, so is of a similar height, and that is in the 60s and 70s. So it is those are the things we took into account when we considered it.
You mean St. Vincent's?
St. Vincent's, yes. Sorry, apologies. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
So St. Vincent's is well established. Has been there for a long time. Corio House is the most recent, completed in 2017, which is of that same order and height.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Dipesh, could I just ask you very quickly before we move on to hearing from the objectors themselves? Have we got sort of a situation of a double shortfall in terms of the relationship between Unit E and private amenity space and communal, the shortfall of communal space? So Unit E has a private private amenity space of 6.5, and I know from policy, if it's sort of 2 bedrooms or less, they can. The amenity space permissible is between 3 and 10 square meters. But we've got an overall shortfall of 34.5 square meters in terms of communal space. So where there's a shortfall of a private amenity, that is added to communal. So in real terms, is the communal space only 31 square meters because it's then had to and then has been increased to 34.5 because the additional or the shortfall of 3.5 square meters from the private amenity space has been added to the communal. Is that what's happened? or even though we've still got a shortfall of communal space, because it should be 50 square meters, but it's hence the payment for the shortfall of 15.5 square meters. So what's happened there has the shortfall in the private been added to the communal? So that 34.5 incorporates the shortfall of the private amenity space to make up, and it has been increased to the communal space, and then we've got a shortfall of communal space anyway, which should be 50 square centimeters at a minimum.
Sure. No, it hasn't, Chair. So the payment is simply to offset the shortfall in communal amenity space, and as you mentioned, the requirement for private amenity space is 10 square meters for dwellings of 3 bedrooms and more. It's only for smaller dwellings. I think the guidance says ideally 10 square meters should be provided, but anything above 3 square meters is acceptable.
Right, okay, thank you. Back on mute. All righty, thank you for that. No doubt we'll, as has already been indicated, we'll come back to more questions at the end for officers. So I would now like to invite objectors. According to my notes, there's a Caitlin Holt. Are you present, Caitlin?
Hi there, yes I am.
Righto, thank you, you're very welcome. As I think you've probably already been briefed, you've got up to 3 minutes to speak. Are you the only individual that will be speaking during this particular time?
Yes, I am.
So you've got up to thank you for that. You've got up to 3 minutes, and I'm going to ask the constitutional officer to give you a 30-second warning should you find yourself requiring the full 3 minutes, and then at the end of which you will have to finish. All righty.
Okay.
So if and we'll start the clock once you've formally introduced yourself, and yeah, and then we'll go ahead. And you might want to sort of say, you know, not without sort of giving your full address, just sort of give some sort of indication where you're located in relationship to this particular application. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm Caitlin, and I'm speaking on behalf of local residents at Corio House and 48 Grange Walk who strongly object to these plans. We'd like to highlight 3 areas.
Right, okay, we'll start the clock now.
Sorry.
Right, thank you.
We'd like to highlight the following 3 areas: heritage, height, and material loss of light. Section 3.18 of the Safe Southwark Plan says permissions will not be granted for developments that would not preserve or enhance views into or out of a conservation area. Grange Walk is beautiful. Looking down to the conservation area from the west corner of Fendall Street, you can see that the streetscape has a washing line effect, bookended by Corio House at the end. The developer's heritage assessment conveniently omits this view. Page 13 shows the view from the centre of the road, and it's clear that an additional 3 stories would change the fundamental composition of the view onto the terraces of Grange Walk. Notwithstanding stepping back in its facade, the building will be overbearing, disruptive and ugly, and cause material harm to the view out of and onto the conservation area. Onto our second point, we remain concerned that the height of the extension is unsustainable to the area. It has now been clarified that the extension will in fact exceed the height of the tallest part of Corio House. Once you've built higher than the tallest building, how do you ensure sustainable development that doesn't destroy the streetscape of the conservation area for years to come? We're just encouraging a race for the tallest building in a heritage area. A pre-application for additional floors on the same site was rejected in 2015 because of its excessive bulk and height, and it directly acknowledged the 7-storey Corio House being built. What has changed between then and now? Finally, the development will have a detrimental impact to the daylight of our homes. 27% of windows at Corio House fail the VSC test. That is a material negative impact affecting many flats. While the harm will be felt widely, there are 3 flats that are severely impacted, and these 3 flats are the same layout on consecutive floors. It's the living room windows which do not pass the BRE guidelines. Each living room has 3 windows, none of which pass the initial VSC test, and 2 of 3 don't pass the alternative test. It's crucial to look at the cumulative light impact here. In these 3 flats, all of our windows are shadowed by a development site. For one flat, every single window in the flat fails the initial VSC test. That is 100% of one family's daylight substantially impacted. There's no alternative natural light source. These are not second properties. These are our family homes, now our offices, and there are babies being brought up in these impacted flats. We love our homes, and it's clear the extension will have a severe and harmful impact on our light and our well-being. Planning decisions affect an area for years to come. There are valid reasons to be used to reject this application. Section 3.18 of the Southwark Plan, Section 3.13 in relation to height, scale and massing, and failure of the APSH test on multiple windows. Does the committee truly believe that this development is going to enhance the area for the local community and preserve views into and out of the characterful Grange Walk? Thanks to the chair for giving us the opportunity to speak, and I'd like to invite questions from the committee.
Thank you, Caitlin. Appreciate that. Thank you. Do members have any questions for Caitlin at all? None whatsoever?
Could I also take this moment quickly to highlight the windows highlighted in the addendum?
Wait one second. Caitlin, you've had your 3 minutes, so we can actually, the way in which to do this is for members to ask you if you've got any additional questions. I've got, sorry, because your actual 3 minutes is, and you should have actually highlighted, I know where you're sort of going with this, but if members are minded, they can then ask you to sort of for additional comments. We've got one hand up from Councillor David Noakes. So Councillor David Noakes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Caitlin, for your presentation. I just wanted to, well, I mean, it sounds like you wanted to say something more about the impact in regards to daylight and sunlight, I think was the point you were about to make around windows. But I just wanted to, could you just make the point again about the previous application, I think that you referenced being turned down? If you haven't, do you have any more details about?
Yeah, I do. So the initial, thank you very much. The initial 2015 application actually referred directly, and I've got it in front of me. It says in the letter, during the meeting, it was noted that there was a large development underway on the opposite side of the Grange, which is 7 stories, which you argued was a justification for extending the corner at number 48 and subsequent building height at number 46, 47. And then they say that they reject that application because it will be excessive on that corner. So I think previously it's been noted that the reason it was rejected was that Courier House wasn't built, but it's in black and white that they refer directly to the 7-story Courier House being built, and yet still at that point in time rejected. So I'm wondering what changed, nothing else in the streetscape has changed between then and now.
Do you have the planning number? Was that 15/EQ0281? Do you know, or?
It's on the portal. Sorry, what do you mean by it?
The planning application number. Do you have that to hand or not?
Yeah, 15/EQ/0281.
Yeah, no, that's the one. Yeah, okay, thank you. And
sorry,
did you say something else about the daylight and sunlight impact or the windows?
Yes, thank you. It was just the addendum highlights windows which I think are fairly random. Not sure why windows at 155 and 142 are highlighted in the addendum slides. But they're not I corrected this when this was coming around previously, that they're not the windows that are badly impacted.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have any additional questions, Councillor Noakes?
Not for the objectors, Chair. No.
Righto, and we can clear that up with officers later on in the meeting. Maria, you briefly had your hand up. Would you like to ask a question? Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, that thing is not working, Chair. The hand stays for a few seconds and then it goes. Yes, my question, well, it's not a question, is right. Would you like to elaborate a little bit further, Ms. Holt, about the impact of this new building and the conservation area?
Yes, thank you. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with the road, but Grange Walk's lovely, and so we've got the terraces on one side, and then you've got obviously St Vincent House on the other side, which is set back on from greenery. If you stand on the top of Grange Walk when it comes from Tower Bridge Road, you can't see this area at all. You then bend around a corner and you can see Corio House at the end, which I think is a fine looking building, and then there's a very natural kind of washing line effect down onto the conservation area where the terraces are. So you can see that view both from within the conservation area looking out, and if you stood on the corner of Fendall Street looking at the terraces, looking onto the conservation area, they're both lovely views. 3 stories on top of the existing building on that corner is going to look excessive and bulky. I can't see how that's not going to be a blot on a very nice looking townscape that you can see. That it doesn't fit into the character of the local area, and it certainly doesn't enhance nor preserve the views into or out of the conservation area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Liverpool. Councillor Seaton, you've got your hand up. I'd like to ask a question, please.
Indeed, Chair, and I want to thank Caitlin for her presentation. And whilst Councillor Maria Linford asked my initial question, can I just clarify with you on the 2017 application and the dialogue that took place? For example, were you aware at that time that the owner of that property is the same owner of 4647? Were you aware that they were all in the same ownership?
Was I aware in 2017? I believe we put forward a letter from a barrister who, I don't have it in front of me, but yes, they were under this. They were held under different legal names, but it's the same owner that is behind the different legal entities. I'm not probably best placed to speak on behalf of the legalities of. We put forward a letter from a barrister which sets out the argument there.
And to just be clear, what you're saying is that it's the same ultimate owner, but the subsidiaries have different names. So if you hadn't inquired, you'd believe that it was separate ownerships. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Prior to you making that observation, did the applicant volunteer the information either to yourselves or in the presence of planning officers whilst you were present?
No.
Right, okay. Thank you. That's what I just want to be clear. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Seaton. If I don't see any additional hands up, so I thank you for your time, Ms. Holt, and well, thank you for your presentation. Indeed.
Chair,
very much.
Chair, I don't know if you want to go into screen break. It's an hour. Or if you want
Oh, right. Yes, I think this is a perfect time. Thank you. So, colleagues, we'll take a 5